Hi, everyone. It's so exciting watching all these numbers go up. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm just going to give it a few seconds as these numbers continue to rise. Super excited for this session today with our Director of Financial Aid, Beth Flaherty. We'll get started in just a few moments. All right, it looks like our participant list is starting to stabilize here. So for those who just joined, welcome, welcome. We're super excited to be here with our event, What to Expect Next, Financial Aid. This is the first time we do a session of this type, and it is a great privilege to be here with our Director of Financial Aid, Beth Flaherty, who will be talking to you about the financial aid process. Thank you for submitting your applications. We're having a great time reviewing them. Just a quick note before we get started, there is live transcription or closed captioning that has been enabled for this session. So you will see some words there on the bottom of our screen as we talk. If you're not able to see them, then please select the live transcription button on the bottom of your screen on the bottom right. And then you'll see a menu there where you can select show subtitles, and then you should be able to see the words appearing. You can also adjust the font size as well to your preference. So with that, I will go ahead and transition. This presentation will be hosted again by the Director of Financial Aid, Beth Flaherty. She'll introduce herself and take it away. Thank you so much, Beth.
Thank you, Alessandra. Hi, everyone. I took myself off of camera view for a minute and can't seem to get myself back. Oh, here we go. Here I am. Welcome, everyone. I'm Beth Flaherty. I'm the Director of Financial Aid here at HDS, and I'm really pleased to welcome you to our session called What to Expect Next. The purpose of this session is really just an opportunity to sort of walk you through the next steps and the things that you should be thinking ahead to as you're sort of in this waiting period. You've applied for admissions, and now it's hurry up and wait. You're just waiting to hear where you'll be admitted and what your packages might look like. So we thought we could provide some information that might help you to prepare for getting your decisions from various places. I'm going to go ahead and take myself off of the camera for right now, and then I'll turn the video back on at the end when we do the question and answer. So again, that's me. I'm the Director of Financial Aid. Also joining us on the call today, she doesn't have her camera on, but Julie Field, who is our Financial Aid Officer. The two of us make up the HDS Office of Financial Aid. And most of you, if you haven't contacted us or been in contact with us, you will be. So Julie and I are the two people that will hopefully help you through this process. Before we start this session, I just wanted to draw your attention to a couple of previous presentations that you might find helpful. And they are on the portal for the admissions events. And the first one is the merit versus need-based aid, and the second is budgeting for grad school. We certainly will talk about components of each of these presentations, but we're not going to go through everything in depth as we did in those sessions. So it would be helpful, hopefully, for you to go back and review those. One of the things that I will tell you is some of the information has changed slightly since we did those presentations in the early fall. In particular, we've updated our cost of attendance for the 22-23 school year, and we've also made some changes to the stipend amounts for the new academic year, and we'll talk about that in detail a little bit more, but just keep that in mind as you're looking through those presentations. So the first thing we're going to focus on is the HDS application for need-based aid. And I just want to briefly start with, at HDS, we have two types of we have two types of grant aid that we offer. We have a merit-based program, which is the smaller of the two programs, and then we have our need-based program, which is where the bulk of our funding comes from. The need-based does require a financial aid application. The merit-based does not. The merit-based is determined by the admissions committee. They make all those decisions, and we're not involved in that at all. And that's a very small pool of the funding. Usually about 10% of the admitted class will be offered a merit award. For need-based aid, as I said, we do have a financial aid deadline, and an application is required for all need-based grant aid. The deadline is Wednesday, February 9th, 2022, and that is a firm deadline. It is really, really crucial that you meet that deadline, because if you don't meet that deadline and then wait until you've been admitted into a program and then try to apply for financial aid, we can't guarantee you that we're going to have any funding to give at that point. So if you want to be considered for funding, we would highly recommend that you meet that deadline. Julie and I always say, hope for merit, but prepare for need-based. So in the event that you are not offered a merit award, if you have applied for need-based by the deadline and you are eligible, we can just go ahead and award you need-based funding. So even if you think you might not be eligible, don't make that determination yourself. Fill out the form and let us tell you if you're eligible or you're not eligible. Because we do have students that make wrong assumptions and basically take themselves out of the aid pool. So we would recommend that you just go ahead and fill out the application. I also want to mention that all of our need-based funding and the merit-based funding is open to all students in the MTS and MDiv programs. That's both domestic, undocumented, and international students. So all students are eligible to be considered from those pools of funding. We're going to specifically talk about the need-based application requirements. So US citizens or eligible non-citizens must complete the free application for federal student aid, which is the FAFSA, and they also have to complete the HDS application for financial aid. If you are filling out the FAFSA, you want to make sure that you send your FAFSA to HDS and not Harvard University. So when you are choosing the drop-down menu for schools, you want to make sure that you're selecting Harvard Divinity School, or you're typing in the code, which is E00210. If you don't specifically have that information sent to HDS, we will not receive the information. If you send it to the generic Harvard University one, that goes to the undergraduate college, they get hundreds of thousands of FAFSAs and they have no way of knowing you applied to a different school. So we won't see the information. So it's really important that you send that information to the correct school. International and undocumented students only have to complete the HDS application for aid. They don't need to submit the FAFSA. Financial aid application instructions were mailed to those who applied for admissions to both the MTS and MDiv programs on January 11th, 2022. A separate reminder announcement was sent through HDS admissions on January 18th, just in case. On rare occasions, our emails have been known to go to students' junk or spam accounts. So we had admissions resend just a notification that that went out. If you have not received anything from us about applying, please send us an email, and our contact information will be at the end of the presentation, but it's financial_aid@hds.harvard.edu, and we can make sure that that information gets resent to you. And again, as we've said, all applicants are really encouraged to apply for need-based aid. We will, in the next couple of weeks, be sending you reminder emails. We sent one reminder last week. We'll send out another later this week, telling you what parts of your application are missing. If you are not receiving any emails, and you filled out the information, then that generally means that your application is complete. But it's always a good idea to check in with us just to be sure. If we continue to send you emails saying that something is missing, that means we don't have it yet. In the case of the FAFSA takes a couple of business days to process, usually about 2 to 4 business days. So if you fill it out on a Monday and I send you a reminder on a Tuesday that we don't have it, it often means that we'll be getting it in the next couple of days. But if you filled it out, I would say probably a week or more from the time that we're sending you a reminder email, you'll want to check in with us because it could be that you selected the wrong school. It could be that you transposed a number on your social security number and therefore it didn't match up with the information in our system. So if we keep asking you for forms that you think you already submitted, just check in with us to double check. The other thing that I want to mention about applying for financial aid is that graduate students are considered independent for financial aid purposes. So that means that we are looking at the student's income and assets and the spouse's income and assets if the student is married, but we are not looking at parental information. And I know that's a big question that students have, but at the graduate level, at least for our purposes, we don't look at parental information. We know that some law schools and medical schools typically do, but we don't. So we'll only be looking at your information. If you are married, as of the time you're filling out the FAFSA information, you do need to include your spouse's income and assets, even if you were not married in the 2020 tax year, which is the information that you're putting on the form. So let's say you're married now, but you weren't married in 2020. You do have to include your spouse's income, their adjusted gross income, and their taxes paid and their assets. So in the case of adjusted gross income, you would look at their 2020 taxes and add that to your 2020 HEI, and you do the same for your taxes paid. And then you can just include your income from work and your spouse's income from work, and then combine all of your assets. When we are looking at financial aid, we do look at previous loan debt, and we do take that into consideration, both graduate and undergraduate debt, but we give more emphasis to undergraduate debt. If you have federal loans, we will see that when your FAFSA gets submitted to us. So you don't need to tell us about your federal loan debt. We can figure that out on our own. If you have private debt, so that's not a federal Stafford loan or a Graduate Plus loan, but if you borrowed a loan from a private loan from like a Sallie Mae or Wells Fargo, we do ask a question on the institutional application where you can include what amounts you borrowed for private loans in undergraduate and in your graduate programs. And we may ask you to provide us with documentation of that later on, but don't send it right now. If we need it, we'll ask you for it. But that helps us to determine what a student's overall debt level is. Educational debt, I should say. We're only looking at educational debt. And it's important to note that students will qualify for need-based aid or merit aid, but not both. So you won't receive a merit award and then need-based funding on top of that. Another thing that I think is important to note, especially when we talk about need-based aid, is students are often very concerned that whether or not they need aid will impact whether or not they are admitted to the program. And I can tell you at HDS, we're need blind in the admissions process. So that means that no one in the admissions committee knows who's applying for financial aid. They have no access to any of your financial information. So whether or not you need aid to come here will never factor into whether or not you can be admitted. So now we're going to talk about the waiting game. So right now you're in that period where you've applied, you're in the process of applying for financial aid, but what do you do? What do you do in the meantime to get yourself ready and to pass the time until you get all of these notifications, hopefully positive notifications? So when we sent out the request, when we sent out the information about this presentation, we got lots of questions asking about housing. So I did want to include a couple of slides that I think will hopefully be helpful. And many thanks to our Office of Student Life for providing those slides to me. In terms of housing, I think this is just a good rule of thumb, no matter where you're going to attend, is that you really need to spend some time researching the housing costs of the schools that you're planning to apply to, so that you have an expectation of what you're going to need. Because depending upon where you are in the country, in one place you can get an apartment for $1,200 a month, and other places it could be $500 a month, and other places it could be thousands. We happen to be in a more expensive part of the country. It doesn't mean that you won't be able to find something affordable, but you do need to spend some time thinking about where you want to live and what your expectations for housing are. So I think general questions to ask yourself to the schools that you're applying are, do they have university housing, or do students typically rely on off-campus housing? If they do have university housing, is it more economical than living off campus? In some cases that will be yes, in some cases it will be no. What areas are close to school but may be less expensive? So, you know, in our case, it's convenient to live in Cambridge, but that tends to be a little bit more expensive. So some of our students look to some of the outside communities that are a little less expensive. But also keep in mind when you're looking to, you know, maybe live someplace where the housing costs are a little bit cheaper, you also have to calculate what the commute would be. Because sometimes you're going to spend a lot of time on a train, or you're going to have to drive to a train station. And that commute could really impact how much time you can spend on campus and whether or not you're on a reliable public transportation system. You know, if you're in and around Cambridge, the T is fairly reliable, but if you live further out and you're relying on something called the commuter rail, those trains don't run as often in the later parts of the day. And rush hour in the morning and then in the afternoon, they run fairly regularly, but in the evening, they don't run as often. And so that could make it difficult to get back home. If you're renting off campus, you need to think about what you're going to need to secure an apartment. So in a lot of cases, you're going to need first, last, and security deposits in some areas. And there are some places in our area where you also need a broker's fee. Because you have to go through a broker agent in order to be able to rent an apartment. Not in every case, but certainly in some. And a broker's fee is often equivalent to 1 month's worth of rent. So those are things to think about as well. In terms of where the HDS students live, the majority are living in Cambridge and Somerville, and HDS is right on the Somerville line. So many of our students choose to live there. Student Life tells us that about 41% of students are living in Cambridge, about 25% of students live in Somerville, and the remaining students live in various Boston suburbs. I would say a lot of students live Arlington, Watertown, Brighton, Alston, tend to be areas that students look in as well. HDS students find housing from various locations. Many students are interested in living in Harvard University housing. So let me just start off by saying that the Harvard Divinity School, aside from the Center for the Study of World Religion, and I'll talk about them briefly in a minute, HDS doesn't have its own housing. We don't have dormitories. We don't have our own apartments other than the CSWR. So if a student wants to live on campus, that essentially means that they're renting from Harvard University real estate. And so there's a lot of positive reasons for why a student would want to do that. First off, they typically don't require first, last, and security deposits. You get into a housing lottery that you apply for, and you usually have to do that by early May. The apartments are usually well maintained and close by to campus, but the sticker rate is a little bit higher than if you were looking with a private landlord. So you are paying a little bit more to live in Harvard University housing. It's not discounted. So that's important to think about. And most of those leases are usually year-long leases. They have been very flexible because of the pandemic. I don't know if that's going to be the plan, but you can certainly visit the Harvard University real estate website. They have a lot of really good information. On the next page, we actually have the URL for that. But we do have students that live on campus. In addition to why it's also attractive to live in Harvard University housing is you can choose your apartments online, and that is often a cost saver so that you don't have to come to Cambridge to search for an apartment. The issue with the lottery is the lower your lottery number, the better opportunities you're going to get. So the lesser expensive places go first, and the more expensive places are usually available later on. So if you get into the lottery draw and you have a later date, you might not, if you get anything, you might find your options are fairly expensive. So it's good to cast a wide net. I mean, I would say apply to that lottery and sort of see what happens with that, but also look at outside sources. So a lot of our students look on Craigslist, on PadMapper, Zillow. There's a Harvard off-campus housing site. The Center for the Study of World Religion is part of the Divinity School. They're more of an intentional community, so you actually have to apply to live in their apartments. And they don't have a ton of units. I want to say probably, between 15 or so apartments, but you have to submit an application, and it's more of an intentional process for that. So not every student that applies will be accepted, but for some students that works out really well. If you are admitted to a program, you will get more information than you've ever imagined from a variety of offices, including Student Life, who will send you out a lot of information about housing and where to look for it. We usually also have, as part of the accepted student open house that happens either late March or early April, we have sessions about how students find housing. And there are also a number of Facebook groups that once you accept your spot, they'll kind of put you in those groups. And those are good opportunities for you to find roommates. Our students will often post if they're looking to sublet, or if they're looking for roommates, or if they have a great deal and they're going to be moving away. It's an opportunity for students to find good opportunities. And then there's a Harvard MIT housing site, and also Queer Exchange Boston. So, and again, you'll get lots of information about this should you be admitted to the program. But this is just to kind of highlight some of the options available. As I said, if you're interested in Harvard University, their website does have helpful information about the application process. The deadline to apply to their lottery, which is usually in early May, and then usually mid-May through June is when the selection process happens. The other option that I should mention is sometimes students are able to rent from other schools at Harvard that have their own housing. So for example, the business school, the law school, and the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences have some of their own housing, and they're typically more like dormitory style. But those sometimes can be a little less expensive than some of the Harvard University apartments. The only issue with that is you do have to apply for those options, but they give first preference to their own students. And then if they don't fill up all of the dorms, then they will open it up to students at other schools. But we have had a number of students who have found housing that way, and it's worked out quite well for them. So again, just another one of the options when you cast your very wide web. In terms of off-campus, generally May to June is when students start searching for units and finding potential roommates. And then usually by early July, most students have found a place. So other things that you can be doing while you're waiting, I recommend highly that you do a budget. You won't know what you can afford if you haven't figured that out first. We often have students that make the mistake of signing a rental agreement and committing themselves to a rent that they actually can't afford, but they didn't know that because they didn't do the math first. So making a budget, I think, is really essential. I also recommend that you pay down or pay off any previous consumer debt that you can now, just to give yourself some more cash flow. It's also a great idea to start reducing your expenses now, if you can, in order to provide yourself with a small nest egg to prepare for moving to a new city. Because most schools, you're not going to have living expense money prior to arriving in September, and that certainly would be the case at HDS. We don't disperse any funds until classes start in September. So you need to be prepared to come with at least your September's rent and some living expenses prior to arriving. It's also a great idea to research how much is it going to cost to move. Many schools will allow you to provide copies of your paid receipts, and that will allow them to increase your cost of attendance so that you can borrow student loans if you still have eligibility to cover those costs. HDS is one of those, but it's only the cost of moving what you have from where you were to where you're coming. So it would be, if you're driving, it would be the cost of gas and tolls, food along the way. If you're coming a long distance and you need to stay in a hotel a couple of nights, that's fine. If you need to buy boxes or bubble wrap or packing tape, all of that's allowable. If you are flying instead of driving or renting a U-Haul, than just a copy of your paid airline receipt. We can only include the expenses for you. If you have family members that are flying with you, we can't include their airline tickets, but we can include yours. Sometimes a student finds it more economical to fly and then ship their belongings that they need here. And so just keep copies of, if you ship it through UPS or through the post office, just keep copies of paid receipts. And you can turn them into us if you need to borrow in addition to what you're already borrowing. But again, we don't increase grant for this. It's just to increase for loans if you have eligibility. If you have a car, decide if it's really necessary to bring it. And keep in mind that parking and insurance can be much higher in certain parts of the country than others, and that it may not be worth it to you to bring a car. I find that's usually the case here. We have a lot of students who are used to having a car and insist that they need to bring it, but what they haven't accounted for is insurance is much higher here. A lot of students think that they will be able to maintain their plates in their home state and pay that insurance. The issue here is that not every apartment that you're going to rent is going to come with parking, which means that you're going to have to get a parking sticker for the city that you're living in. So for example, a lot of apartments in Cambridge don't have parking. So you can get a parking sticker through the city of Cambridge, but you have to show them that you have Massachusetts plates and that you've switched everything over and that you're residing in Cambridge. So you can't have Alabama plates and get a parking permit in Cambridge. So those are important things to keep in mind. Also, if you're relying on on-street parking, there are lots of issues with snow emergencies and street cleaning, and there are certain parts of the week where you can't park your car in certain areas, and then you've got to figure out a place to bring your car, and oftentimes that means a very expensive parking garage. So, in some cases it may be a necessity to have it, but I find a lot of students bring a car and then don't use it. But it's costing them a lot to have it here. So think about that long and hard if it's necessary. Have a long talk with yourself about your personal resources and how you're going to fund your education, and how do you feel about taking on student debt. We are lucky at HDS that we have pretty significant grant aid. But we are not in a situation where we're going to meet everyone's need 100%, and we are not, even our best packages are not going to cover a student's entire cost of attendance. So you are going to have to figure out how are you going to cover the rest of it. For some students that don't have any of their own personal resources, that will mean taking on some level of student debt. And you have to know how you feel about that. I do always say that you are the beneficiary of your own education. And you decide how much of that investment is worth it to you. But debt is a really personal thing, and oftentimes students don't know how they feel about it until they've taken on what they consider to be too much. So I always recommend that you start thinking about this now. There are also, if you go to the federal student aid website, there are great calculators where you can look at what you already have for student aid, and then you can project what you think you might borrow. And that will help you think about, like, what would my repayment look like if I were to borrow this amount of money? I'm also very happy to do those things with students. We do a lot of counseling, particularly once students have been admitted to the program and made their decision. Over the summer, I'm happy to work with students either in person, if that's an option, or on Zoom to kind of go through, like, what do you think you'll need to borrow? What will repayment look like if I borrow this much money? Just so that you have a sense of what you're doing. And, I have some students that have $5,000 worth of debt total for a 3-year MDiv, and that feels overwhelming and burdensome. And I have had doctoral students who have high 6 figures in student loans, and that doesn't feel over burdensome to them. So it's really individual, and you need to sort of figure out where you fall in that. And then also, I know everyone's always hoping for the highest package possible, but if it doesn't come in for you, what's your plan for covering the rest of your costs, be it here or any other school? And then another thing I think it's really important, if you've never checked your credit report, many private landlords will look at your credit report. So you'll want to know if there's anything adverse on it. And also, if you're interested, and we'll talk about this in a few minutes, but Any student that's interested in borrowing a private loan or a Graduate Plus loan, those require credit checks. So it would be important for you to know if there's going to be any adverse issues on there that would keep you from qualifying for those. You are entitled to, in non-pandemic times, one free yearly credit report from each of the 3 major credit reporting agencies. During the pandemic, they've made those available weekly. So you can, do that. I checked last week and you can still get them on a weekly basis if you want them. But I recommend doing it at least once a year. That's also a great way to know if you've been a victim of identity fraud, because oftentimes that's how people find out that someone's stolen their identity, because they see credit and things that they haven't applied for. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the financial aid timeline. So the most important thing that everyone wants to know is, when will I hear about a financial aid award, and how will I know if I received merit aid, or how will I know if I received need-based aid? So merit aid recipients will receive a notification letter that's included with your online admissions acceptance letter. So you'll get an email from admissions on or around the 15th of March, telling you to go online and view your decision. If your decision says you've been admitted, then you will see the admission letter, and then following it is generally a second letter that shows if you were offered a merit award. If you do not have that second letter saying that you received a merit award and what type of merit award it was, then you can assume that you did not receive it. You will receive notifications within 24 hours of receiving your admissions notification. Sometimes it's the same day, but it will certainly be within 24 hours. And what will happen is, when you log into the financial aid system, you will see your merit grant and your stipend award. For U.S. citizens and eligible non-citizens that also submitted a FAFSA and have eligibility for federal Stafford loans, will award you up to $8,500 of your unsubsidized loan eligibility. We don't award all of the Stafford loan eligibility because we want students to really think carefully about what they need to borrow. So those are conversations that we'll have over the summer, and we'll send you information usually after the first bill goes out in July about how to request additional loan eligibility if you need it. And then merit awards are renewable for the length of the admitted program. So if you're awarded as an MDiv, it's for the length of that MDiv program. And providing that you maintain satisfactory academic progress towards your degree. Merit awards are offered at the time of admissions notifications and decisions are final, and HDS is unable to reassess for merit in years 2 or years 3 of the program. So if you don't get offered a merit award when you're admitted, you won't be receiving merit for the length of the program. For need-based recipients, again, you're going to, for those students that have met the financial aid deadline and have qualified for need-based aid, they will receive a financial aid notification email within 24 hours of receiving their admissions acceptance. As I said before, if you don't have a second letter with your admissions letter saying that you received merit-based aid, you can assume that you have received need-based aid. When you log into the financial aid system, you'll see your grant, and some students will also have a stipend award. Again, for U.S. citizens and eligible non-citizens that have submitted the FAFSA and that have eligibility for federal student loans, will award up to $8,500 of their unsubsidized loan eligibility. Need-based grant awards are renewable at the same level for the length of the admitted program, providing you maintain satisfactory academic progress towards your degree and reapply for aid each year, and still continue to demonstrate financial need. We are unfortunately unable to increase your need-based grant percentages in years 2 and 3 of the program. And that's largely because we have an incredibly needy population of students. About 90% of our students are getting some sort of institutional grant, be it merit or need-based. And nobody gets richer while in graduate school. So most students are experiencing a significant drop in their income, and we just unfortunately don't have the means to go back and reassess in years 2 or 3 of the program. I do want to talk a little bit about the institutional grant aid that we're offering, and we do have a change since the information that we distributed back in our sessions in the fall. So for need-based aid, again, it's available to all eligible MTS and MDiv applicants. Financial aid application is required, and you're eligible to apply, but not all students will be eligible for the grant aid. There are 3 levels of need-based aid: a 75% tuition grant, 100% tuition grant, and in very extreme cases of need, 100% tuition grant and a $12,000 living expense stipend. That living expense stipend has been increased, and actually the living expense stipends for all of our need-based stipends and for our merit aid stipends have significantly increased for next year. And we're very pleased to be able to do that. We feel like we haven't increased stipends significantly in several years, and so it felt like this was the time to do it. And we just recently got approval to do that. So I'm really pleased to share this information with you. For international students, the stipend last year was $8,000. If you're eligible for the need-based stipend for this year, it will also be $12,000. For our merit aid, we have a small pool of merit aid that's awarded based on the overall strength of the application. Again, that's all decided by the admissions office and is final. Consideration is automatically given to all students at the time of admission. There's no application required. And there are a couple of different levels of merit awards. So our highest, and the one that we give the fewest number of awards out for, is the presidential stipend. That is full tuition, and this year it will be a $20,000 stipend. That's up from $11,000, so that's a very significant increase. For our ministry fellow stipend, we give out a little bit more than we do of the presidential, but not a huge amount. Those stipends have been increased from $11,000 to $15,000, and our dean's fellow stipends have been increased from $9,000 to $12,000. And again, the merit awards are determined by the admissions committee at the point of admission and are final. I do want to just briefly talk about the 2022-23 cost of attendance. So every school is required by the Department of Education to come up with a good faith estimate of what it will cost to attend a school for the academic year. At HDS, we only enroll September through May. We don't have an official summer enrollment period. We do offer the summer language program, but those courses count towards your fall full-time enrollment. So we don't have grants or loans to give over the summer. So we can only include the costs in the academic year towards our cost of attendance. So the tuition for this year, this will be the second year in a row that we have not increased tuition. So it will be $30,472. And then you see we have the Blue Cross Blue Shield, which is that is the individual health insurance. So that's if you have to go to the hospital or your medical visits or things like that. That's required by all students unless you are covered under another plan. So if you're under 26 and are covered by a parent plan, or you have your own plan, or you're covered by a spouse, you would be eligible to waive that, and that cost would be deducted from your cost of attendance. The second fee, the University Health Services fee, is a required fee for all students, and that cannot be waived even if you can waive the Blue Cross Blue Shield. The UHS fee covers you if you get sick on campus and need to see a doctor. It also covers a lot of the mental health resources on campus. And then we have the activities fee, and that's $70 for the year. And those tuition and the mandatory health fees and the activity fee are things that are going to be billed to your student account. So those are fixed costs. We know exactly what those will be. The other items, the food, the housing, the books, the miscellaneous, these are estimates, and we think they're good estimates based on what our students tell us and what we know the students are paying for rent in the area and for food. But again, it's a bare bones budget. The Department of Education doesn't let us include things like car payments or credit card payments or cell phones. So there aren't we don't have a lot of leeway in the budget, but this gives you a basic idea of what the cost of attendance will be. Other ways that you can fund your degree, we're going to talk about student employment. For US citizens or eligible non-citizens, there are student loan options available, and then also private scholarships. So federal work study is a need-based program for US citizens and eligible non-citizens. So you have to fill out the FAFSA, excuse me, in order for us to know if you qualify for federal work study. HDS does not prepackage federal work studies. So don't assume that because you don't see it on your initial award letter, that means that you're not eligible. Many of our students, I would say the large majority of students, are eligible for work study. After you receive an award letter, US citizens and eligible non-citizens who have completed a FAFSA can send an email to the financial aid office and let us know if it looks like you would be eligible for federal work study. At HDS, we don't award your federal work study eligibility until a student finds a position. Students who accept their admissions offer will have access to the student employment website to search for available positions in late May or early June after you've received and activated your Harvard Key information. So that's your PIN and your email. Federal work study for students that are admitted into the class of 22-23 starts for fall 22 semester. So you can't work through work study in the summer prior to classes beginning. There are some offices that can hire students over the summer. That would be a non-work study position. And you would just apply directly through that office, and you don't have to go through us if you're not using work study. The maximum yearly federal work study allocation is $6,000, which gives about 10 to 12 hours a week of work per week. That's because HDS gets an allocation from the university, and we want to make sure that we're giving it to as many students as possible so that we can get as many students working. And students are welcome to work anywhere throughout the university. You can work at the Kennedy School, at the law school, at the ed school. Certainly, many offices at the Divinity School hire students. And we have lots of students that work in libraries as well. And there are also some off-campus opportunities available that qualify for work study. You can work more than one work study job. So if you have one job that's great, that will give you 5 hours, and another that will give you another 5 hours, you can certainly do that. You just can't exceed your $6,000 in eligibility. And I should say that many students who are doing field education positions, most field education positions are paid for through federal work study. So you certainly can use that for those positions as well. We don't have a limit to how many hours of work you can work, hours of work a week you can work, but we do not recommend that you work more than 20 hours a week. And in most cases, that's too much. I would say the average is about 10 to 15. And that seems more manageable. I would specifically say, oftentimes I have a student that will come to me and say, but I think I can work 30 to 35 hours a week. And what I would say to you is, if you've never done that while being enrolled in full-time coursework at a very rigorous academic setting, I wouldn't start with that. And I certainly wouldn't make my budget based on that, because you're likely to find a couple of weeks into the semester that may not be attainable. And now you're going to find yourself in a really difficult position. So I would recommend thinking more about the 10 to 15 hour a week, unless you've worked full-time and been a full-time student before. But like I said, most of our students, that just wouldn't work for them. For those students who either are international students, undocumented students who have DACA, or students who are not eligible for federal work study, you may still be able to find on-campus student employment. Students without work study may not have as many positions to choose from. The reason for that is when you have work study, the Department of Education is picking up a percentage of what your earnings are, and then the department's only paying usually about 25% of that. If you don't have work study, the department's paying 100% of what you're earning. So not every office can afford to hire students without work study, but many can. I would say in particular, great places to look are libraries, because they need large volumes of student workers. So they often can accommodate students that don't have work study. There isn't an earning maximum for non-work study positions. Like work study has a $6,000 cap. The non-work study doesn't have a cap. But because your wages are not subsidized like they are under the federal work study program, you may have fewer hours offered. Students can work more than one job. But again, we recommend that you keep your hours to less than 20 hours per week. And if you are an international student, you absolutely cannot work more than 20 hours per week because of your visa restrictions. And you're only able to work on campus here at Harvard. I'm gonna go pretty quickly through this because we've covered these in other presentations, but we do have student loans available. The unsubsidized Stafford loans are guaranteed student loans, open to US citizens and eligible non-citizens. And here's the criteria for whether or not you would be eligible. I'm not going to go into great detail because I want to be able to get to some of the questions. The Federal Direct Graduate Plus loan is also open to US citizens and eligible non-citizens, but does require a credit check, and not every student will pass that credit check. So it's important to know. That's why I think a credit report is a good idea. That will give you an idea of whether or not it seems likely. The Federal Direct Credit Check is fairly lenient, so they're usually looking at 90 days of first credit, bankruptcies, liens, and charge-offs. If none of that is an issue for you, then the likelihood of you being approved is pretty decent. If you want to borrow a private loan and not go through the federal loan program, you certainly can do that. But all private loans require a pretty stringent credit check and requirement, and they do look at debt to income ratios and your overall credit history. So not every student will qualify, but some that do may find that they get a better interest rate. So certainly something to think about. And I do want to mention that for international students, unfortunately, HDS does not participate in a loan program that would not require an international student to have a US cosigner. So oftentimes loan options are not available unless you can get one through your home country, and you should certainly look at those options. Private scholarships, I would recommend that you do not wait until you've been accepted to start looking for private scholarships, because most have early spring deadlines. If you're going into ministry, look at the Fund for Theological Education's website. They have their own programs, but they also have something called the Fund Finder, where you type in basic information about yourself and it will spit out scholarships you might be eligible for. You should also check with your church, alma mater, or social organizations that you belong to for scholarship opportunities. And we also have an outside grants and scholarship page on our website. I will keep in mind that that's a very small smattering of what might be out there. And it really is up to the student to look for these opportunities. We suggest Google searches, reach out to faculty mentors, and just get an idea of what types of resources might be out there, because while we do post what we're aware of, we know it's a small smattering. And that's just a look at our page. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera back on, and we're going to answer a couple of the questions that were submitted prior to the presentation, and then we'll try to get to some of them that are in the chat. So the first question is, if a student needs more aid than is offered by HDS, can the student appeal to the college for more aid? At HDS, we go out with the best offer we have to offer a student, and we are not able to negotiate. We know that sometimes you're going to get a different package and sometimes a better package from another institution. We feel the right thing to do is to go out with what we think we can offer you, and then you have to make your decision accordingly. The only exception to that is if we sent you an email saying that you are not eligible for aid and there's something important that you didn't tell us, or something that you reported that you shouldn't have. For example, we tell you don't report your retirement investments that are in like secured retirement accounts like 401ks or 403bs. On occasion, the student has reported that income and then realized they shouldn't have. And then when they let us know about that and can show us the documentation that that's actually in a protected retirement account that they can't take out without very substantial penalties, then we can reassess that case. But in most cases, we get calls all the time. So-and-so institution gave me this, can you match that? And unfortunately, we don't. Are teaching fellowships available, and are they related to work study? There are teaching fellowships available, but quite honestly, at Harvard, most of them go to doctoral students because it's actually part of their financial aid package. It's part of what they're offered, and the expectation is that they're going to teach during their doctoral program here. In some cases, we do have some students that are able to get teaching fellowships, but they're usually with the undergraduate college, and they're often through relationships that you develop with faculty over time. So not necessarily something that would be eligible for in your first year. And you do have to get permission from your school in order to be able to do it. So it's not necessarily something that I would count on. Sometimes they're paid for through work study. They often aren't. They're usually paid through a different budget. But it could be something, but again, it's not something that I would bank upon. Does Harvard subsidize housing for graduate students? And unfortunately, we don't. When you live in Harvard University housing, you're really just, Harvard is your landlord, but there isn't any discount for living in that housing. But some students, you know, if you get a good number in the lottery, you might get a pretty affordable apartment through there, or you may be able to hook up with roommates. So it's certainly something to think about, but unfortunately, we don't subsidize. Will financial aid cover campus living expenses and health insurance fees? So any grant that you receive will cover tuition, but not the mandatory fees. So say, for example, if you get a full tuition grant, it will cover 100% of your tuition, but it will not cover your health insurance fees or the student activity fee. So those you have to pay out of pocket. If you are receiving a stipend, those stipends we look at more as going towards your living expenses, but they, in most cases, they're not going to cover everything. And stipends get paid to students on a monthly basis. So from September to May, you get a monthly installment of that. So you won't have your stipend up front to be able to pay your health insurance fees, because those will have to be paid prior to classes starting in September. So you need to think about how you want to cover those. All right, so I think those were the main ones. And I'm going to look at the Q&A and see if I can take a couple. Okay, one of the questions is there a monetary asset amount that would be considered too high for a student to qualify for financial aid? Is what typically is the average asset amount an applicant has to qualify for aid? To be honest with you, I can't really answer that because there are so many different things that get factored in. What I would say is go ahead and apply. The worst thing that we can say is that you're not eligible. But don't make the decision. I mean, sometimes I've had students that say I have $5,000 in savings. Does that mean I won't get grant aid? No, it doesn't. But there isn't a specific cutoff that I can say. I would say, like, if you have $1 million in assets, it's very unlikely that you're going to get any institutional grant aid. But if you have 30,000, does that mean that you would be counted out? Probably not. Normally, I would say certainly not. But if you're married to someone that has significant income, that's a different situation. So that's why that's a very hard question to answer. The merit-based funding, I think we've talked about, but that's determined by the admissions office, and there isn't a tried and true formula. I mean, they're looking at all of the applications as a whole, and they're going through that, looking for what they think is important. I think they're very good at getting to, we often have students that want us to tell them exactly, like, how do I write an application in order to get merit aid? And the truth is, if you write an application like that, they're going to see through you. So what I say is hope for merit, but do your work, fill out your need-based application, and hopefully, you'll be eligible for some need-based grant. Okay. Can we include private education debt for our children? No, we only look at your individual debt. We don't look at the debt, the educational debt of your children or of your spouse. Would anyone applying for outside scholarship in addition with HDS offers be affected? So it depends on the level of scholarship that you're getting, but typically what we try to do is use your outside scholarship towards your unmet need. So anything that's not covered by scholarship or grant that you have need for. And if we have to reduce things, we would reduce loans and then work study. There are occasions when we do have to reduce our institutional grant, but that's because the outside grant that a student is bringing in is so large that they would be over their overall cost of attendance. But in most cases, if you bring in a $5,000, $10,000 outside scholarship, in many cases, it won't affect your institutional grant aid. But you should let us know once you start getting confirmations of outside funding so that we can tell you for sure once you've been awarded. Do you need to reapply for merit aid in year 2 and 3? No. If you receive merit aid in year 1, as long as you're making academic progress and you're in the same program that you received the merit award for, you'll receive that for the length of the program. The HDS financial aid application mentioned contacting the office if finances have changed drastically since 2020 taxes. If there's anything that you think we need to know that's not that we didn't ask for on the application, just go ahead and send us an email to financial_aid@hds.harvard.edu, and we will put that information with your file. I would say if your income changed, like it's $5,000 less than it was the year before, or it's 5,000 more, that I wouldn't worry about. But if there's a significant change, or if there's an extenuating circumstance that we wouldn't know about, shoot us an email just so we have that information. Blue Cross Blue Shield, does it cover a full 12 months or just 9 months? It's actually the full year. So it runs from I think it starts in August and it runs until July, but you'll receive lots of information about that over the summer. Do you have graduate housing resident advisor positions that either pay or cover housing expenses? There is a program through Harvard College called resident tutors or proctors that are very similar to resident advisors, but those due dates are typically in early January, and probably it has already closed for this year. And they often don't select people in the first year of a program, but we have a number of students who have received these fellowships in years 2 or 3 of the program. So certainly something to think about in your 2nd or 3rd year. You can apply prior to being admitted to a program, but if you hadn't already submitted an application, you're too late for this year. And those do cover housing, so it certainly is helpful if you're able to get it. I'm going to try to take 2 more questions. If an admitted student chooses to defer a year in order to pursue another opportunity before matriculation, as an example of Fulbright, what happens to need and merit-based offers? You can defer your admissions, but you cannot defer your financial aid award or your merit award. So if you decide not to attend in that year, then you go back into the pool for funding. And then if you had a merit award, you're now going to be compared to the new class. And in some cases, you might be offered the same merit award, but there have been cases where you weren't offered a merit award. And the same thing with need-based. We're going to reassess you based on what your situation is when you reapply for financial aid. And I'll do one more. When I complete the FAFSA, I should select every school I am applying to, correct? Yes, you should choose all of the schools that require a FAFSA. Some don't require you to apply for need-based aid because they just do merit aid, and then you just fill out a FAFSA later if you want student loans. But you should look at the websites for all the schools that you're planning to apply to and make sure that you have the correct information. But in most cases, yes, you should select every school that you're intending to apply to. Okay, in closing, because we're coming to the end of our time, if there was a pressing question that you had that I wasn't able to get to, please feel free to send me an email, financial_aid@hds.harvard.edu, and we are happy to respond to you. If you have questions, if you think something is stupid, oftentimes students don't ask it because they think it's stupid, and the truth is, even if it is, we're not going to tell you, so ask us. If you're confused about the process, if there's something that you don't understand, reach out to us. I thank you so much for your time and your attention. Good luck to all of you. I hope we will be corresponding with many of you in the early mid to late March and talking about your awards and whether or not you'll be joining us next year. And again, any questions, please reach out.